Hello everybody, welcome to another tutorial video. Today we are going to be talking about how to do some basic clock service on 55 and 56 Packard clocks. Now the first thing I want to say is that if you are dead set on getting your clock working, you might want to just send it into a professional clock service. That is because they don't really like it if you try and work on your own clock and then send it into them. But if you just kind of one day thought, it can't be that hard to get my clock working, then this probably will be a good video for you, I hope. We're going to discuss kind of how the clocks work and why they stop working and basically how to get them going again. Now, here we have a 56 senior clock, a 55 clipper, and a 55 senior clock. These are all made by the Borg company. Now, if you have a Packard that's not 55 or 56, but pretty close, and the clock looks similar to one of these, then it'll probably be about the same, to open it up or service it. Likewise, if you have a non-Packard Borg clock, roughly 55 or 56, and it looks kind of like one of these, then it might be the same. Pretty much all these electric clocks work the same way. However, the actual mechanism can be very different inside. You'll see that when we take apart this one versus this one. Even though they're the same company and only 1 year apart, the design is much different. And how we take them apart is different also a little bit. So just something to keep in mind if you have a clock that's not one of these that may be significantly different. But this should still help you out. Now, one common question which you may not need, may not be on your mind if you're already watching this video, but the question is, why even care about having a working clock? And what I like is a couple things. One is that that's how the car came. You might have a car with the original drivetrain, the original paint colors, the matching interior, the radio works, the accessories work, but the clock doesn't work. Why? It's just people just never get them to work, but it is a cool thing to have. And then the other thing is also kind of the exclusivity, is that most people just don't have their clocks working. So, you can go to a car show and you might have 30 other cars there that have as good or the same or better paint or interior or whatever as your car, but how many of them are going to have a working clock? Probably not a whole lot. So, it is quite nice to have, just as a little quirk into, well, not really like quirk because they were so common, but just as a nice thing to have working on the car. So with that being said, I'm going to disassemble this here, or disassemble it enough to service, and explain how the clocks work. I just bumped my tripod there, I'm sorry. And talk about also why they usually stop working. So I'm going to shut my power supply off here. So for a 56 Packard clock, we're going to start out imagining that it's still in the car. How you get it out of the car is you take the nuts off of these studs on the back. Probably not a huge surprise that you can see here. But what I like to do specifically is to get these two nuts off first. And then when you have your hand reach behind the dash to get those off, you can pull the clock back and then flip it over whichever way. And then through the hole in the dash, you can get the light out and unscrew this. So that way you're not doing that blind. You can see it through the dash. So we just pop the light out here. This is the same as in, a dash, instrument cluster or anything. Bulb just pops in there, of course. And then unscrew this nut. I know it's a little stupid using needle nose pliers, but I just don't have my my sockets handy right now. Now, obviously, these are going to be attached to the car. Don't snip them off here. This is just because I got this clock as a part and not off of one of my own cars that I have the wires like that. If your clock has never been disassembled before, you will see some kind of dents on the side there that are holding the bezel on. If it has been disassembled, they'll already be pried up. Whichever way, make sure they're pried up enough. This one, there's 4 of them. And then once they're pried up, you can just gently pull on this bezel and get it off of the clock face. Just set that to the side. And then for this one, the only other thing we do, so I'm holding the clock face so it doesn't fall on the table. And then I'm pushing up on this simultaneously down on this electrical stud here. and we just pop that off like that. So now we have our clock open here. Now, the question is, why do these clocks stop working? And it basically all comes down to that they're not lubricated enough. The clock makers generally would expect that it gets disassembled to this amount here and is lubricated professionally approximately once per year, which actually, really, when you think about it, is not that common considering that it's running all the time. But pretty much no one would do that. So it's pretty common for the clocks to just get more and more friction in the components and eventually kind of just seize up. There's a couple things that can happen. If the clock is wound, sometimes, if it just seizes up partially wound, then that's all that's happening, and nothing else really will get damaged. So you can just lubricate it and get it going again, like as was the case with this clock I'm holding right now. However, if the clock is kind of binding up and the clock is trying to wind itself electrically, then it can blow the fuse, which is, I think, what happened with this one. This one we're going to open up on camera here. I haven't had it open yet. But this one, the car had a blown fuse, so that might have been what happened there. Now, of course, you can't just replace the fuse. You have to lubricate the clock components. But hopefully when you do, then that'll get working again. If the fuse doesn't blow, then it can damage something inside of the clock, which is, I think, what happened on this one here. And I'll show you that a bit later. For now, I want to go over how these clocks actually work pretty quickly. So one is that let's say, for example, we have a mechanism that is turning the second hand at the correct speed. We'll just have that as a given. Well, how do we turn the other two hands? Well, it's probably not that hard to imagine that when we have the second hand turning around one time, that our minute hand turns a 60th of a turn. So we just have a 60-to-1 gear reduction between the second and the minute hand. And then we get our minute hand moving at the correct speed. Likewise, the minute hand moving around once, the hour hand we expect to move around 1/12 of a turn. So we have a 12-to-1 reduction there, and that gets all our hands moving at the correct speed, assuming that the second hand is moving at the correct speed. And this is how basically every single clock works. So on this particular clock, all of this stuff down here below this layer, all this stuff here is either that gearing or it is to support the adjustment knob, which obviously just adjusts the time on the clock. This middle section here, like I said, for that example, we had the given that the second hand is moving at the correct speed. Well, how does the second hand actually move at 1 second per second? Well, that is the job of this middle section here on this clock, which is the escapement. An escapement is essentially just a mechanism that, when triggered, moves a certain amount. One instrument that commonly has an escapement is a typewriter. Essentially, every typewriter has an escapement. A lot of times, if you have a pretty high quality one, it'll actually brag on the top here. It says jeweled escapement, if I can pronounce the words. Where they would use generally industrial quality sapphires because they are extremely hard and have very low friction. So it's great for a moving mechanism there. And of course, the mechanical escapements in these clocks, they're the same pretty much in mechanical watches and pretty much any other mechanical clock. So a typewriter, if you hit any key, including the space bar, it moves the carriage by one space. But it doesn't matter how long we hold this or whatever. When we trigger the escapement, it moves the predictable amount, and then when we release the key, the escapement resets itself. This typewriter actually has something where the escapement keeps resetting itself. It's called the power space. So as you can see, if we have the escapement resetting itself, then we can have a pretty predictable movement speed. And that's how clock escapements work too, essentially. It's the same idea. So I'm going to wind this clock a little bit to show what's going on here. So we have a flywheel here, and as you can see, it kind of flicks this thing back and forth. What that actually does is moves these little wires kind of in and out of that cog there, right there. So when the flywheel moves a certain way to trigger that mechanism, the cog moves a certain amount because it pulls the one wire out, which moves the cog, but then the cog moves directly into the other wire when this thing switches direction. And how often it switches direction is governed by the mass of the flywheel and the spring that's there, which we're not going to do any math here, but you know, the clock is designed so that this moves at a predictable rate. Let me wind the clock up again a little more. There we go. This particular one, the escapement moves, the escapement advances 4 times per second. So if we look at our second hand here, we can see it actually ticks 4 times per second. Just as a fun fact, Rolex watches, you can either get them to tick 1 time per second, or the continuous moving ones actually tick 8 times per second. So it's the exact same thing going on there. Let me wind the clock a bit. So what's happening is we have a spring that puts some tension on this gear, puts some torque on this gear, and then it just gets geared up twice until we get to the escapement mechanism there. And that's actually when you turn this adjustment to move the clock slower or faster, that actually changes, as you can see, this little like flag kind of piece there. The spring rests against that, and changing that changes the effective spring constant. So when we move it in the faster direction, it gets moved up a little bit to make the spring a little stiffer, and it makes the flywheel kind of go through its periodic motion slightly faster, and then opposite, vice versa. So that's our escapement there, and the only thing we have to do is wind the clock to get the escapement working. Now, in older automobile clocks, the clocks you would just have to wind roughly once a day, just like in an old wristwatch or whatever. For these electric clocks, how they work is actually quite ingenious here. You have a pair of contacts, and then you have this kind of counterweight attached to a spring. This contact here is grounded. This one here goes to this solenoid, which is here, and that goes to the battery terminal. When the clock is almost all the way unwound, these two contacts touch and completes the electrical circuit, which fires the solenoid. So what basically happens is this here, and then it'll wind the clock again slightly more. That's actually, it actually uses quite a bit more force than that. I didn't hit it very hard. I can actually just demonstrate that here with my power supply. So we can see when I touch this here, the solenoid's gonna fire. And that'll run the clock for about a minute and a half or so. But it's easy to see that when this unwinds, the contacts will touch again and the cycle will repeat. So that's how the clock winds itself, just with of course, there's a ratcheting mechanism there, etc. So how you want to get this going is, like for this particular one, you can just push this down a little bit and see if the clock runs. And if it doesn't run, then you need to lubricate it. So what I usually use is some 3-in-1 oil. This stuff seems to be pretty safe for plastics. Though if you're worried about that, you can use silicone-based oil or something like that, should be fine. But you really just want to get this in everywhere, and especially pay attention to that. A lot of the binding is going to occur where these little axles meet, where these little axles are mounted in. So you want to make sure you get that everywhere, and then on both sides also. So like, don't just apply it to this plate here, but also flip it around and apply it down there. Obviously this is not particularly this is pretty obvious advice, but it is easy to miss that type of stuff. And really, once you have that all going there, you can should be able to wind the clock, or you can kind of just touch this a little bit and it does the same thing to get the clock going and get the lubricant in there. And after that, you can hook up power to the clock and see if it runs itself, and this one does. The only thing left to mention on this particularly if you're doing some restoration work. Now, so this thing doesn't want to come out because it's held in with this, I don't know what this is, shrink wrap or exactly what it is. You could probably cut this off and remove this piece if you wanted to, if you want to refinish it and then put new shrink wrap on there or something, but I'm not going to do that. What you can do, of course, is just pull this out, and that'll get you most all that you need. If you want to refinish this piece here, this actually just unscrews. So if you hold the metal piece on the far side and just get some needle nose pliers on here or something like that, and this plastic piece just unscrews, and that'll separate your pieces there so you can get that nice and polished up. So next we are going to take a look at this clock here. So this is the disassembly steps for a 55 clock, and it should be the same for either of these two. We're going to look at this one later. This one, you have mostly the same stuff going on. You need to undo the dents in the bezel there so you can pull the bezel straight off. If I can do it. There we go. Now these, sometimes you have these paper seals. They're supposed to stay glued on. A lot of times they don't. So yeah, I would recommend if they are glued on to not try and pull them off, because it's pretty hard to get them centered back on. I'm not even going to show that in this video because it's too annoying to try and do. I mean, it's obvious on how to do it. You just center it back up. It's just super annoying. This one in particular, I should have removed the screws in the back before doing that part, but oh well. No big deal. The screws in the back, there's of course quite a few things going on here, and it's not obvious what you want to remove. You actually only remove these two screws. Everything else stays. Now obviously you got to disconnect it from the car and pull the light out. That just comes straight out. If you're curious what this is the same as the fast, slow, your adjustment there. On this particular model of clock, you could adjust it from the front of the clock or the back of the clock. I really don't know why they made that redundant that way, but that's what they did. This here appears to be a wire clip, but as far as I know, Packard never used them for anything. So we just get these screws out of here. And then there's this foam backing here, so that might, your clock is probably going to stick to that, and you'll just kind of have to kind of wiggle it out from the case and just put the foam back in there. So you have the basically the same thing going where you just want to lubricate this whole mechanism. However, as you can see, this one is a lot harder to see what stuff is going on and where. So that's why I intentionally used the other clock to demonstrate how these clocks work, even though this one works pretty much the exact same way. Now, this one here electrically does not work yet. I'm going to see if I can get it working here. I'm going to cut the video and just come back. But the solenoid here is this thing, and then there's this big metal slug. So when the solenoid fires, it pulls the slug inward like this and winds the clock up like that there. Now this one doesn't even have a second hand, so it's kind of harder to see that it's even going, but it is. So we can see there. So what happened with this one here, I believe the fuse on this did not blow, though I'm not certain. I could check. And the connection between the battery and the solenoid actually melted here. There's a kind of a solder blob attached to a wire. Let's see if I can get this on camera. Not very easily. Solder blob attached to a wire Then below that is this contact. If I can get this in any type of light. I think that's the best we're going to get there. It'll focus. So we have solder blob and a contact there. And those are supposed to be connected together. So I'm going to try and solder those back in place, and we're going to see if that will get this clock going. Hello everyone, welcome back. I have this soldered all together now. Really the only thing, just getting that one solder joint done there. So now we're going to see if this works. Now if you're using a power supply, make sure that you set your current limit to the amount that the car is fused at for the clock. And if you're using, installing this in the car, make sure you actually do have a fuse installed. And you're not just hooking it directly to the battery or something like that. But we are going to give this a shot here. The clock is completely unwound, so we'll turn our power supply output on there and see how this goes. There we go. We do have the clock working now. So, so you can see just like on the other clock, our contacts here opened up. So what I'm going to do now, this clock actually takes way longer to unwind than the other one, is find a nice stable place where we can hook up our contacts here, hook up our jumper clips, and see the clock wind again when it is time. There we go, we get that one on there. This clock has the opposite polarity, or the car has the opposite polarity as the other clock, but really these clocks are polarity independent, it shouldn't matter. So our contact's just closed there. So just turn the power supply on. So we can see our contacts, our solenoid opened up enough to open up our contacts, and our clock keeps running. Whoops. Guess that wasn't on there as well as I hoped it was. So next thing we're going to do is open up this clock here. This one might take, it's pretty close for the contacts to click back there. This one actually has kind of a nice design because the contacts, they are on, there's this spring back here that when the contacts get close enough, the contacts push themselves closed with a spring so that there is not as much arcing going on as in the other design. Of course, I believe the solenoid in this one draws much more power than in the 1956 clock, so it may not be necessary in that one. So we do have our contacts almost closed again here. See if I can get this closer to the camera this time. As you can see, when they get almost all the way, then they're actually spring shut and then open again as the solenoid winds itself, as the solenoid fires and the clock winds itself. And there we go. So this one seems to be working quite well now. So our reassembly steps, of course, make sure that this foam stuff is back in the way that it came out originally. And then the easiest way to do this is actually to hold the clock by its face like this, and then just drop this on top of it here. Now we will have to get the this piece back on, so I might just Well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what you want to do is get this lined up where you can put the 2 little screws back in. There's no reason to leave this nut off. I just happen to have it off. You can put it on before you put the case on. It doesn't matter. You just put the 2 little screws back in there. Takes a little bit of lining up, but no big deal. And then, of course, this just goes on the reverse of how it came off. The gasket here goes in between this black piece and the metal frame here, I believe. But that's too hard to do, so I'll just do it off camera. It's not hard as long as it stays on there, but this one it's already come off, so it's going to be a little too annoying. So now we are going to take a look at this clock. I haven't opened it up yet. We're just going to do it live here and see if we can figure it out. What is wrong? This one, of course, is going to need lubrication, and we're going to see if anything else is wrong with it here. So we just need to get these pried up. Now, just a little warning, if you do this, you are avoiding your clock's warranty. Fortunately for you, it did not have a 70-year warranty. It had, I think, it was either a 6-month warranty or a year warranty, something like that. So, yeah. Yeah, we're definitely not servicing it at one of the authorized service centers. Woe on us for trying to do this here, but I don't think that will be a problem. So we set our screws aside here. This, of course, comes open the exact same way as the clipper clock. If I ever said lock instead of clock in this video, I apologize. I'm not sure if I have, but I just made a video about locks the other day, so it's kind of still on the brain. So this should... Let's get the bezel off here. Just as a reminder, if your clock's not working and you find that it has a blown fuse, don't just hook up power to it. You definitely want to make sure everything is good to go mechanically, because you can always mechanically test it when you have the clock open before you, apply power to it. So now we need to get this out here. There we go. Perfect. Didn't even come off that time. This thing is still holding on by a thread, the little paper gasket. So we're going to hope that stays on. This one looks way brighter than the other one, which is no real surprise considering the car that this came off of was stored in a garage for pretty much its entire life. And the other one was stored outside for probably half of its life. At least a couple decades. So this one is certainly a lot shinier. Let's see. Yeah, so this one here doesn't have the same problem as the other one. The other one, I know it was hard to see in the video, but this tab and this wire here, there's a solder joint there. The other ones were melted and that came apart. This one is not that way. So the first thing I want to test out is if I just wind the clock a little bit by hand, whether it goes by itself. So we can see it ratchets up there, but really nothing is happening. We can, yeah, really just nothing is happening. Very likely just because we need some lubrication. So we're going to open up the 3-in-1 oil and go to town here, just lubricating as much as possible. Need to get some on the main gearing there. Of course I can't. There we go. Where else? You need to make sure everything on the escapement is oiled up as well as it can be, because that is what's moving the most and the fastest. So the flywheel needs some oil. We have our escapement cog here. We're going to make sure that it's oiled up on both sides. This thing. some oil on that. Being a little repetitive, but you literally want to make sure you are oiling literally every joint possible. And ideally you want to have a bottle of oil that has a spout that's a bit more, this is the marksman spout, but it's still not very marksman-y. But so what else do we need to oil here? We can get a little bit of access if we kind of pivot some things out of the way here. But not a whole lot of access, so maybe there's no point even. It looks like our this paper seal came off again, so I'll just take this off completely so we don't break it by accident. Oh, it's still hanging on by a thread there. Oh, okay, whatever, I'll just leave it there. So on our escapement, we can turn one of these gears here and kind of get things going. They should turn better, should turn easier one way than the other way. There we go. We can very gently fiddle around with this until we have our, get our flywheel wanting to turn there. I think that even needs some lubrication right in the middle there. There we go. So I'm off camera a little bit. Our flywheel is going a little bit there. And then as we can see, the correct direction for things to turn. So we can kind of just get this turning a little bit ourselves here. Maybe. Sorry, I keep going off camera. So once you have a bit of oil on things, you can kind of gently touch one of these gears. Make sure your flywheel's free. Make sure the whatnot is free. And this will kind of get things spinning a little bit because everything's so dry in there. There's just once you put the oil on, that's not going to fix it automatically. Things do need to get going a little bit here. As we can see, once we get them going, they do keep going quite a good amount. I'm actually going to wind this as much as possible so we have the maximum spring tension and see if things just keep going by themselves at this point. We also want to keep an eye out if we can remember what we oiled exactly. I would stopped here. Keep an eye out and see if there's anything we didn't oil that we should have. This is you want to have a rag handy so you don't have, try not to get oil on the clock face because that won't look very good. I don't want to try and clean it. So a lot of the things in here I don't think got enough oil yet, so we can get some oil kind of dumped in there. And also don't be afraid to turn your clock in whatever orientation. It should run in any orientation. That'll help get the oil into places. For example, I've been holding it like this, so turning it upside down can be a little bit helpful. Just make sure that you have this stuff out of the way where it's not interfering with your hands that are very slowly moving there, of course. So we can see our clock actually seems to be working pretty reliably now. One thing which is, because it's so hard to do, but you should get some lubrication on those gears right in that thin gap there. I'm going to see if I can just drop some on there. Hopefully that's a little better. And then of course you can just work the gear mechanism to get everything kind of dialed in there. You just want to make sure you're not turning it too far. So on this one, what you're actually doing is rotating this piece here. So there's this gear rack. It's actually almost all the way to one side. I mean, I bet this clock was running a bit slow, and that's why it's all the way over there. So if we turn it to the fast direction, I was actually turned all the way to fast. So, oh, that is right, because with the clock's running slower, you turn it towards fast. So we can kind of just rotate this mechanism around. Whoops. As long as we're not messing things up there. I think my screwdriver just slipped. Also seems like someone kind of over-torqued that at one point. I'm looking at the clock, my screwdriver, whoops, and sometimes the camera, because I try and keep things in frame, and it can be a little much to look at one time. I don't really know why it doesn't want to turn past the middle there, but I don't know. It's just how it is for some reason. We can also turn it on this particular model of clock. We can adjust it on the back here and basically just do the exact same thing. Yeah, I don't know why that doesn't want to turn past the middle. We'll see if that's even necessary, though. But throughout this whole time, our clock has been continuing to work great, which obviously is the important thing. And it should unwind quite far. The essential test to look at is to make sure your clock can unwind enough where that these contacts touch, and that it's still going. Because if it doesn't unwind that far, then it'll never wind itself back up by, shorting the contacts together. At the same time, on this one, it's actually going to go back on my car, so I'm going to take this metal piece off so I can polish it. So, of course, how we do that is just, let's see here. So, to try and protect my clock face, I'm going to move this metal piece back into place if I can. Actually, doesn't really do a whole lot to protect it, but because I kind of need to rest it on its face here, or at least hold it that way. I'm taking this metal piece off, so I just unscrew this with some pliers. Which is quite hard to do with all this stuff together here, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So what's nice is now we have this clock working again here. I'm going to get this polished up and get the clock bit back together. Now I will have a working clock in my car. And as you can see, it's really not all that bad to do this here. So I think I'm going to leave things off there. So this video doesn't get too long. It's already, I know, over half an hour long if I decide to put all the parts together, which I think I will. But yeah, with that all being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know this was a pretty long video, but I think it was quite informative and showed all the necessary details and such things that you can't just do in a 5-minute video. So with that being said, thanks for watching, and I will catch you later.